We're used to talking about EdTech and student experiences at scale, that is, from the district level. But what about the complex and developing internal worlds students bring with them every day to school? To see and take care of the whole child requires a certain special set of skills, one that you can find in a school psychologist. Welcome to EdTech Explored, where we talk about all things EdTech. What's working, what's changing, and what educators need to know to stay ahead. I'm Erin Wera, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Lauren Pazorski, and today we're joined by our fabulous guest, Tammy Tonn, who is a semi-retired school psychologist. Today we're talking about kids' well-being balanced with their school responsibilities and how technology could play into that.
Welcome to the show, Tammy. We're excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So, kids arrive at school with way more than backpacks, as we know. Students may have all kinds of weird stuff going on in their heads, and we really don't know about it until they feel comfortable sharing it with us. I remember when I was in school, I was so upset about getting a C on a spelling test because it meant I couldn't be in the school play. In my head, this was obviously not true. But these unseen things that kids bring to school with them have an impact on their learning. And as a school psychologist, you're an expert in that mental, emotional growth.
Before we get into our first question, can you start by telling us just a little bit about you and your background and your career so far?
Sure. So I started out as a school psychologist in 1991. I was hired by CISA 5 out of Portage. It's a cooperative that provides services to smaller school districts that can't afford their own school psych or occupational therapists, things like that. And at that point, it was very typical for a school psychologist to service several school districts. And so I was in 3 different school districts in 3 different directions in the state. And so I was on the road a lot. The more difficult part about that is because you're only in a building one day or a district 1 day a week or 2 days a week, you really don't get to know anyone, and you're just seen as the person that comes in and tests students for special education needs. You're not really seen as a resource for the school district. And as somebody that's more extroverted, it's hard to not be kind of part of that community. So that first year was difficult for me. After that, I then was placed in Necedah, where I spent the next 15 years, which was a fabulous place to be. 1 school building, so I was spoiled, 4K through 12, and never had to leave the building. And it was a great dynamic there. They kind of went through my early years of raising children and all the things, so you become a family when you kind of go through that stuff. Then from there, I became a special education director. And so I would go out into different school districts and support school districts, mostly with legal type things and more difficult cases that involved maybe parents that were struggling understanding the process, or the school and the parent maybe didn't see eye to eye. So I would kind of help mediate that. And I did that for 3 years. Then Westfield was a school district that I was the director in at the time. And they also needed a school psychologist, which I had a license as a school psychologist. So I went to Westfield then as their director and school psychologist, and I did that for the last 16 years. I retired at the end of last school year after 35 years, and came out of retirement to help in the school district of Stevens Point, and started in Jefferson this last year, Jefferson Elementary, which was an amazing experience. And now this coming up next school year, I'll be at Washington Elementary.
And were you working with kids K through 12?
My entire career has been actually 3-year-olds through senior, sometimes up through 21. That's what we're licensed for, 3 through 21. However, this last school year, I was in 1 building, whereas I come from experience of being in 5 different buildings. At this school, there was pre-K through 6th grade, but there's psychologists for 3K and psychologists for 4K. And so I just worked with kindergarten through 6th grade, which was unusual for me. I'm used to having the whole gamut. So, yeah, it was wonderful in 1 school building.
So school has changed a ton since you first started. Can you talk about some of the changes you've seen and how those changes impact the whole child?
It's a great question. And and change is almost seems like an understatement. When I first started out, everything that I did with evaluation reports and meetings with parents was all handwritten. My reports were handwritten. I shouldn't say that. My reports were done on a typewriter with a lot of whiteout until I got the typewriter that had the little white tape in it, and I could use that. That I thought was a pretty big deal. But the times that we met with parents was all handwritten. And then at the end of the meeting, we would rip this triplicate apart and hand one to the parent, and one stayed at school and one would go to CISA. From that to then getting computers and using floppy drives and then the smaller disks, and just that progression. Getting a phone at my desk was a big deal. Getting answering machines was a big deal. And so all of that was done, and the excitement was to save us so much time. Putting that phone on my desk, anytime I did save from being able to use technology, I lost because that phone was now on my desk, or the voicemails, or just being available basically when needed. That took some time away that maybe I saved to now, whereas everything that we do is all web-based. Even the phones are web-based. And if I'm at home and someone calls my desk phone, it comes through my computer. Text messaging, which I do love because nowadays no one picks up their phone. It's very unusual for anybody to pick up their phone. So a lot of my correspondence is text messaging with families. Which I like because it's convenient for them because they can respond on their lunch if they're working, or, a lot of our families are sleeping during the day because they work nights, so it's more convenient for them. But if someone would have told me 30 years ago that I was going to be sending a message through my computer to their phone, I would have kind of laughed like, what are you talking about? This isn't the Jetsons, people. So I just dated myself by saying that. But
well, good thing we grew up on the Jetsons.
Exactly. Thank goodness.
So talking about all of these different types of technologies that you used to do your job, do you think those have an impact on students? And do they have an impact on their social emotional learning?
100%. As probably 10 years ago, it was still books in front of students, workbooks, and that still exists. But now there's many schools have one-to-one, so every child has a computer. And much of their day is spent on the computer. And then these same children are going home, and some environments are still screen heavy at home as well. And I just see a concerns when you ask about social emotional. What comes to mind is that when we went to school, or when years ago before technology, what was happening at school stayed at school. And then we could go home and tell a parent or grandparent or whoever, this happened at school. They could talk it out, and then it was kind of done until maybe the next day. Now, with technology, it just continues. Whether it's the cyberbullying that you hear so much about, or just it can be relentless. So that's a piece of it that I struggle with the most, is that it just can't end at school, and then they get home, and it's home environment where they feel safe, and whereas now all of that is following them. That concerns me. I'm seeing a change in students' problem-solving skills, because if they don't know something, and I find myself even doing it sometimes, instead of just kind of working through it, I'll go to technology, because I want to get there quicker. Yeah. But I have the stamina to do the harder things, whereas children just coming through and learning those types of things, I'm seeing their problem-solving skills become less and less, which then impacts their stamina to do hard things, because it's all right there, And when they do hard things and becomes hard, then their frustration level is, they get frustrated and then they're done. And then to try to kind of encourage them, that's the impact I see that technology is having on our kids. It's more significant than anything else.
That's really interesting when you break it down to those types of skills.
I worry about that. Yeah. Because what makes us the work ethic is the ability to do hard things and the stamina and to keep going until we can figure it out. And I worry what that's going to look like if we continue at the pace that we are.
You mentioned that 24/7 aspect where it's like they have the technology, they're on screens at school, they go home, it's more of the same. What can schools and families do to help set boundaries to, make sure that it's not something that is going to have a negative effect 24/7?
Right. And it's only from what I observe. Right. What I would like to see happening is when I go to the grocery store and instead of parents saying, well, we need some bananas. Can you find the yellow bananas? Instead, I'm seeing kids in the front of their carts on a telephone, on a screen. And so all of that, we're missing out on that language piece with kids. We're not just speaking to the kids. And all of that is brain development. When they're out at restaurants, just looking around, the adults are on their phones, the kids are on their tablets. And I know why. I 100% know why, because kids who are behaving in the public, if they're not behaving, parents feel like it's a reflection on them. I've got 2 adult children. I understand that feeling of, poor behavior means I'm a bad parent, that feeling that we've had. But how are kids going to learn to handle all of that and how to behave and what types of things are acceptable and not acceptable if we don't put them in positions to deal with it? Yeah. And putting a tablet in front of them is not the way to do it.
Can technology ever support us in learning how to become human together and getting those SEL skills in?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, there's some great programs that we use in the school system to assist with that. And I think technology is just that. It should assist us.
Right.
Not be the one thing that's going to, teach us this skill. It's an assist to the adult interaction and the adult modeling of the behavior that we want to see. We are the best teachers, whether you're the parent, the teacher, and technology just cannot replace that. So I do think it can be a help, though.
Okay, and so when you're using technology, I'm just thinking back to the filling out by hand in triplicate. That's really tough when you do scale that up, because we are talking about the individual students and what's going on in their lives. But you're also serving students at scale across many districts. Do you find that the documentation has become easier, or are there more barriers now?
Documentation is so key to helping that child. Everything from documentation from the teacher on what they're seeing in the classroom, from the parent, what they're seeing at home, and then what we see just from the full day of the child navigating the school day. Putting that all into a report is time consuming because you want it all to kind of mesh. But more importantly, at the end of all of that, you want to give some recommendations, and here's how we're going to help. I know when I supervision and things like that with special education teachers and all the evaluations that are done, I often will say to them, coming to the table and saying to them that your child is struggling in reading or your child is struggling with this particular behavior. Yep, that's why we're here. Mm-hmm. So there needs to be another level of, because of these struggles, we are going to do this. And here's some recommendations. And I feel like that piece is missing, but technology can help with that.
Okay.
And that is just kind of moving into, and I know there's the differing opinions, but using assistive or artificial intelligence to help with problem solving, especially when you're the only school psych sometimes in a district. You can put into AI, I have a child who's doing XYZ in this type of environment. The child likes these types of rewards. What are some recommendations? And it will give you some recommendations, which that is helpful. So I see that there's bits and pieces of technology that could assist with all of the report writing and save some time to do all the data collection that you need to do. Okay. If that makes sense?
Yeah, so, it really does.
Yeah.
Well, and because there's so many districts that there is maybe less than one school psychology person in the district. Mm-hmm. So being able to have that support as a staff member, but also I'm really interested in then the school to home connection, because we know that the challenges are moving from school to home and back very fluidly, but these plans that school psychologists make for families, how do they keep up that engagement with families and check in on those? We see and document what's happening in school. Yeah. But what about the family connection?
We have so many different definitions of families right now and what that looks like and what the home looks like for the child. So I'm always very cautious on what I'm suggesting to the families because I can't certainly assume that there's going to be two adults in the home or an adult and maybe an older sibling. What can I expect and encourage the family to do that won't just add more stress? Because when you have a child that's struggling with learning or struggling with behavior, that alone is stressful.
Yeah, right.
Because it changes the whole dynamic of what you had planned for your child. Yeah. And so navigating that piece with the parent and walking the journey with them on just that alone takes some time. So it's mainly just asking the parent, and I often do when I'm interviewing them, because I always interview the parent either on paper or over the phone or face-to-face about kind of their experience. And then oftentimes my question to them is, who's taking care of you? Who do you talk to? Yeah. And most of the time, it's no one's taking care of me, or, I'm fine. I don't need, and so I try to be that person that they then can call when they need somebody to say, this is going on, I don't know what to do. And then I will help them with resources. So that's how I try to make the connection between home and school, is meeting the parent where they're at. Because once they feel like there's a connection, then they will be more open to listening to what I've got to say about their child.
So much so. Absolutely.
So that's kind of been my thing.
And those examples and walking through that really drives home how school districts are taking care of their entire community. And it's a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm. Especially for teachers.
Yeah.
You had mentioned earlier, I don't remember, about, kids coming into school with their backpacks on. Yeah. And I liked you saying that, because I often refer to that many kids who walk in that door, their backpack's already full of emotional stuff. And they're already dysregulated because they didn't get breakfast, or things didn't go well, or, they were being hollered at because they weren't getting dressed quickly enough, which I remember yelling at my kids, we got to get going, come on, and so they're coming in with full backpacks. But what we also don't realize or think about often enough is that all of us are coming in sometimes with our backpacks full. Many teachers are showing up to work with lots of stressors on their plate, and they're being encouraged to establish a relationship with this child, and that should help their behavior and do all the things, be all the things for the child. But are we being all the things for that teacher so that they are available to be all things for their child? And I hope that's some of the role that I play too, is to be available for staff. But we have to remember that staff have backpacks too that are awfully full and overflowing, and we're expecting a lot out of them.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people you're serving, though, between the student population, the educators, the families. There's a lot of different people that you're interacting with and you're getting to help in your role.
And I love it. I love it.
Is there anything that we can talk about? What's the healthiest part of schools today for students or for staff?
The healthiest part would be relationships.
Okay.
No amount of curriculum, no amount of technology cannot replace relationships. And so I would hope that every child that comes to school has a healthy relationship with peers as well as an adult, at least one adult. I often ask, and if I'm writing any plans, I always put in the plans, like you have to put like who's responsible for something. And I will put classroom teacher or trusted adult, another trusted adult. And I always encourage parents, ask your child, if something's not going well, if you need to talk to somebody, who can you talk to at school? And there are some kids that will say no one. And we hope that that's few and far between. And those are the kids that we want to know about so that we can hook them up to make sure that they have a trusted adult. So those are the things that I believe are the healthiest, or what we should strive to be the healthiest in schools, is just the relationship and meeting kids at the doorway with a high five or a fist bump or a hug. So
Absolutely.
Nice.
Yeah. So you have a unique perspective as a school psychologist. For any educators who are listening to this podcast right now, what's something that you would like them to see from the perspective of someone who does psychology for a living?
What I always come back to is behavior is communication. Every time that there's behavior, whether it's an adult or whether it's a child, they're trying to tell you something, but they don't have the skills to express it with their language, or they cannot do it. And so we have to be better listeners to that behavior.
Yeah.
And I work with so many wonderful colleagues that really do an excellent job of that. But I wish everybody would see that as behaviors communication and not just a child trying to be a stinker.
Absolutely.
So,
and like you said, it's the case for adults too. It's something we all can keep in mind. Behavior is communication. If,
Yep.
If a behavior seems off, there's something
Right.
that person is trying to communicate.
Yep.
And maybe asking that question.
Exactly. Exactly.
Something that I keep hearing you say is students are coming to school and they are not regulated. Can we talk about what a regulated student looks like, feels like, and what they're capable of compared to a peer that is not regulated?
Believe it or not, that's not as an easy observation. What I like to describe is get to know your child's or your adult, whoever you're dealing with. Could be your assistant in your classroom, could be a co-teacher. Get to know their baseline. For example, my baseline, the secretary I had for many years, if I was quiet, she knew something must be going on, because I rarely was quiet unless I was, in a meeting or something like that. So get to know the child's baseline. So if they're typically quiet and more reserved and all of a sudden they're not, dysregulated, have a conversation, or not about, what's going on, not pointed like that, but just try to redirect. Or if you've got a child who's constantly, kind of a mover and a shaker,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden they're not,
Sure.
That then also is telling you something's not quite right. And so maybe my expectations for that child will look different. I'm not going to bring the rigor down. I'm not going to, allow poor behavior, but I might wait a bit to ask for them to do something that might be difficult if I notice they're off baseline. Same thing with an adult. If we're married, or, significant other, and we see they're off baseline, now might not be the time to bring up a more difficult conversation. It kind of goes across all ages. So my, I guess, bottom line is if you see they're off baseline or they are dysregulated, change your overall expectations for that moment, provide them a safe place, provide them a time, and know them well enough to know what does regulate them or what does bring them back to baseline, and then start from there for expectations. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you know in your role, dealing with such personal things, what are signs that you've made an impact on a student's life?
I think the two things that have always spoken to me or helped me determine whether I made an impact or not is one, if I'm providing some sort of feedback, if the person says, or even child says, I hadn't thought of it that way, that is like gold to me. I just love that, because that's all I'm hoping to do, because most times people know what they need to do. They know the right thing. They know in that situation when it's just the two of us, they know what they should have done. They have the right answers. But in the moment where, emotions are high, you sometimes kind of have rock brain, is what we like to call with the kids, where you're in the wrong part of the brain and I can't problem solve right now. So when I hear someone say, I hadn't thought of it that way, that is just, I love that. The other part of it is because such a part of my role is working with special education students and identifying them as needing special education, walking that path with the parent, because again, parents have a plan in place, for that child, and now that plan looks different for them. But I also tell them, now you can see your child through a different lens, not a lens that's bad. It's just different. And now there's an explanation to the behavior. There's an explanation to the frustration. And to get them to look at it that way. And so over the years, between the academics and behaviors, there's been so many kids and so many children who are cognitively delayed, but yet they've got the heart as big as Wisconsin. So I've got all of that stuff going on, but in the end, it's all about how are we going to see this child through a lens of success? How are we going to get this child from where they're at right now so they're productive in society and they're happy? And so that if that happens, then I know that I was successful, or we were successful, and I was part of that team.
What would you say is your favorite part of your job?
Favorite part of my job is when we are sitting around an evaluation meeting, and I typically lead those meetings. And then I kind of go around the table and we all give our testing results or what we've kind of come up with. The best part is when the next person says, that's exactly what I saw, and my testing shows this. And everything, it's almost like putting a puzzle together, and every piece is just going in perfectly. And by the time we're done, we've got an intact puzzle, it's put together, and we're ready to go for the next steps about a plan for that student. That is just the best part. And I have to say, that's usually what happens. We usually, by the time we get around the table, we've spent enough time with the student, and we're able to do that. And it's good for the parent too, because they're seeing a group of people that really know their child. That's probably my most favorite part of my job. But I like a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can
like
tell.
a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
What's one thing that you look at in schools today with students that makes you think the kids are all right?
I think the rigor academically that is provided in, just the elementary school that I was just at, and I'm certain the next elementary school that I'm in, the rigor and the expectations of the academics is spot on. In fact, it's incredible the things that I remember learning in fourth grade. Multiplication timed things is happening in first grade. It's just amazing to me that the expectations at an earlier age, academically, they're getting their needs met.
That is wonderful. It sounds great. And I heard that in your answer earlier, that at no time are you looking to decrease the rigor for students. You are always wanting them to learn what they need to learn. They just may approach it in a different way. They may need a scaffold, stuff like that. But never do you bring down the rigor.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What I was going to go on to say is that the part that I probably worry about, is that okay to?
Of course.
Is that executive functioning came up a lot this year. And what that is that there's different ways of planning for things. There's different areas of executive functioning that affects everybody, but affects more often the people with attention deficit disorder or when you're not regulated, things like that. And I would like families and educators to maybe assist with that more. And the best example I like to give, actually 2 examples, and anybody who's worked with me the last few years has heard this example, is have your child make a peanut butter sandwich. And when I say that is that, most times, like if I want a peanut butter sandwich, by the time I get out of my chair and to the kitchen, in my brain, that sandwich is made. Because on the way there, I'm like, I got to grab the bread and the knife and the peanut butter and a plate. It's all made by the time I get to the counter. Students who are struggling with executive functioning, nothing happens until they hit the kitchen. And then you hear kids saying, where's the bread? Where's the peanut butter? And parents want to be helpful. So they're not making kids figure it out. And so start practicing early when your kids are little, run into your bedroom and get the socks and the clothes back. Have them following 2-step directions, 3-step directions. Have them working on executive functioning skills so that when they get to school, they are able to organize their homework. They're able to organize their behavior. They have the capacity to do it. And that's another thing that I don't think technology is helping, because everything is so immediate and they don't have the skills to do with the executive functioning. So now we're finding that as almost a disability in some kids. And it wouldn't have to be if we could start that sooner to help them with their peanut butter sandwiches, so to speak.
Yeah, in your example, you walk into the kitchen, start asking, where's this, where's that? It's like prompting a chatbot,
Exactly.
So it's interesting to see the difference there in that the sandwich is already made in your head, but we get to the kitchen, start asking questions in the kids' head.
That's a great example to help illustrate that.
Yeah. The other part is sometimes we forget, the mental math that needs to be taking place, and we can do that with kids in the morning. Okay, we need to be on the bus by 6:50. What time do we need to get up? What time do we need to brush our teeth? When do we have to be dressed by? When should be talking out loud? Having kids listen to you do that math, as I like to say, so that they can start that planning. Because oftentimes kids are getting up and nothing's done. And so parents are yelling, because I've been there, yelling, come on, we've got 5 minutes. I told you to brush your teeth. There's all those things that we can be working on to help that whole executive functioning piece that I'm seeing struggle with so many kids now.
I think my last question for you then, if you had a look in your crystal ball and you had to anticipate what the future holds for students in K-12, what do you think that looks like right now, and what should their leaders focus on?
When I even see this in my adult niece, nephews, children, or my own kids, it's less and less with their phones. So I do think the pendulum will swing back, that we will find ourselves moving away from technology as much. And we all, you hear that talk now, they're moving away from one-to-ones in some schools. So I do think we're going to be fine, but we're going to have a period of time here where we're going to have to do more educating and problem solving and things like that, social skills. But my crystal ball tells me that we will get back on track, and we will be okay. So I already see it kind of swinging in that direction.
That's interesting.
That's good to hear. Yeah.
I hope so anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully in my time too.
Yeah.
We're kind of learning a new normal with the way.
Yeah.
And that's interesting to be in the middle of the learning of the new normal.
Right. And I've often said, I'm so glad I raised my children during a time that we did not have technology. I'm glad I didn't have to navigate that, along with navigating everything else, being a parent. So I'm glad that I didn't have to worry about that.
I've even heard from younger colleagues that because they grew up with the internet and social media, they think about their behavior differently. So that's interesting to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, thank you so much to our wonderful guest, Tammy, for sharing all of your insights and your advice for districts who are looking to serve whole children and the whole children in front of them, not just the mythical child. So, if you enjoyed this episode, you can follow and subscribe to our other episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you listen. You can find this episode and others at skyward.com/podcast. And you can send us your questions or volunteer to be a guest at podcast@skyward.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.